So, the 70s! What a decade that was. The space missions of Apollo 13 and 17 and the Apple I and II personal computers saw the light of day. Much later, they would have a huge impact on the way we experience music through iTunes and the iPod. And of course, its younger sibling, the Sony Walkman. But also the Rumble in the Jungle, with boxing legends Muhammad Ali against George Foreman. But that's not what we're here to talk about, because we're only in it for the music. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of We're Only in It for the Music, a brand new YouTube series that takes you on a musical journey through videos about pop, rock, jazz, blues, soul, and funk. In other words, from ABBA to Zappa and everything in between. If you're enjoying this series, don't forget to click like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when a new episode drops. But enough of that. Never mind the bollocks, we're only in it for the music. Statistically speaking, the 1970s were the decade in which the greatest number of classic albums were released. And as already explained in episode 1 of the 10 Essentials series, we're grouping all those wonderful records into chronological bundles of 10. That way, every essential debut album will get its turn, and as a bonus, you won't have to compare an early 70s prog album with a late 70s punk record. All albums are ranked just as you may know from the album ranking episodes. Every track receives a score between 0 and 10, and each album can earn extra points for sound production, sequencing, and the sleeve, the so-called triple S system. I applied this rating to 10 albums released between 1970 and 1971, which brings us to the second episode of this series. Once we've covered the decades of the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s, we'll launch the next chapter for the 1960s. Enough administrative rambling, let's dive right in. Before we reveal number 10, I want to briefly mention that Black Sabbath's debut is absolutely an essential 1970 debut album. However, since we already covered it extensively in the Ozzy Osbourne special, you won't find it in this list. Rest assured, though, it would have ranked very high. All right, let's kick off this list of 10 essentials. Closing it out is the illustrious former frontman of Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett, with his album, The Madcap Laughs. The Crazy Diamond only shone briefly during his time with Floyd, and after their second album, A Saucer Full of Secrets, the curtain fell for Barrett. With a little help from his old Floyd bandmates, he tentatively began a solo career. Perhaps David Gilmour and Roger Waters felt a bit guilty. After all, one day they simply decided not to pick Syd up anymore for the next Floyd gig. Also joining in was Robert Wyatt of Soft Machine, who sat behind the drums on 2 tracks. The album itself, wrapped in the characteristic Hypnosis sleeve, includes strong Barrett songs like Terrapin, Dark Globe, and Octopus. But as a whole, the record stumbles a little too much for my taste. That's mainly due to Syd's loose sense of timing, which makes the songs feel like they don't quite flow, as if he's writing and recording them while playing them for the very first time. It's comparable to what Neil Young would do on many of his later albums. For those who, after 1.5 Pink Floyd records and a handful of obscure singles, still can't get enough of Syd Barrett, The Madcap Laughs lets you linger a little longer in his fascinating world. He would go on to release 2 more solo albums, but that was really the end of the line. Syd withdrew from public life, made one last appearance during the recording of Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here, and then disappeared for good. In 2006, he passed away at the age of 60. And now, ladies and gents, number 9.
Number 9.
We're staying in prog rock territory, but moving from the lush English countryside to the Netherlands, as the Hague-based band Super Sister takes the number 9 spot with Present for Nancy. Led by keyboard virtuoso Robert Jan Stips, Super Sister was considered in the early 70s to be the Dutch answer to the mothers of invention and Soft Machine, the band that featured Robert Wyatt and Kevin Ayers. If you were to listen blindly to this debut, you'd swear it came straight out of the Canterbury scene. But in fact, the group hailed from the west of the Netherlands. Stips would later go on to join 2 other iconic Dutch bands, Golden Earring and the Knits, as discussed in the episode about Earring's Contraband album. Before recording and releasing their debut, Super Sister even managed to score a hit with the single She Was Naked. Quite remarkable, since the group was very much an album band, known for their long, sprawling, and often instrumental compositions. It remains a pity that this single was left off the original track list, as it would have certainly boosted the album's overall score. If you're into prog and jazz rock, be sure to give Super Sister a listen. At number 8, we find the self-titled debut of the P-Funk pioneers, Funkadelic. All the elements that would later define the band's unique sound are already present here. On future albums, they would refine these ideas even further. But everything that makes Funkadelic so irresistible can already be found on this first record. Hardly any track clocks in under 6 minutes, giving the band plenty of room to unleash their psychedelic funk vibe on the listener. Funkadelic was born out of two groups, Parliament, led by George Clinton, and Funkadelic, which featured guitar virtuoso Eddie Hazel. Looking for the best of Jimi Hendrix and James Brown rolled into one? Then Funkadelic is right up your alley. Even though we're limiting ourselves strictly to albums from 1970 and 1971, and we've only covered 3 records so far, this list is already shaping up to be an eclectic mix of styles. Let's see which scores this incredible debut from Funkadelic manages to achieve. Anyone who wants to trace things back to the very roots on which so much great music was built inevitably ends up with Ry Cooder, the child prodigy from Santa Monica, California. Cooder weaves together his blend of styles, original compositions, and traditional songs so effortlessly you'd think it was the most natural thing in the world. His early albums, in particular, showcase a refreshing mix of his own work alongside folk songs that sometimes go back centuries. That's no different on his self-titled debut. Cooder serves up a delightful bouquet of rootsy blues, folk, country, and Americana. Van Dyke Parks even joins in, tinkling a piano tune here and there. Listening to Cooder's first outing feels like stepping into a historical museum, or maybe even like traveling through time in a musical time machine. Slide guitar or bottleneck virtuoso, Ry takes you on a grand musical journey. A journey that would eventually lead him across the landscapes of his many film soundtracks, and later in his career, to all corners of the world. And even if you think you're not familiar with his work, chances are you unknowingly own a piece of it in your own record collection, since Ry was the one who brought together the Cuban musicians of the Buena Vista Social Club and recorded the now iconic album with them. Hats off to Ry Cooder. In 6th place, we find a truly remarkable debut with an even more remarkable story, Cold Fact by Sixto Rodriguez. The album flopped miserably upon its release in 1970 and quickly faded into obscurity. But as shown in the brilliant documentary Searching for Sugar Man, the record somehow made its way to South Africa, where it gained cult status. Original pressings are rare and highly collectible, though today countless reissues exist to meet the demand of its newfound appreciation. The LP opens with Sixto's most iconic song, Sugar Man. But tracks like Crucify Your Mind and Inner City Blues will also make you wonder how on earth this record didn't catch on back in 1970. Sonically, it fits the zeitgeist perfectly, and the songwriting is consistently strong. Sometimes it's just a matter of bad luck, though the album cover certainly didn't help convince people to buy it blindly. Admittedly, without the documentary, most people would probably never have heard of Rodriguez. But now that he's been rediscovered, we can finally give his music the recognition it deserves. Sixto experienced a true renaissance when, thanks to the film, his work was embraced worldwide. After decades away from the spotlight, he began performing again, and in the autumn of his life, was at last able to enjoy the acclaim that had long eluded him. Sixto Rodriguez passed away in 2023 at the age of 81. At number 5, we find another great songwriter. This time it is Stephen Stills and his self-titled debut. After the massive success of CSNY's Deja Vu in March 1970, solo albums from all 4 members quickly followed. Neil Young had already released 2 records by then and was working on his After the Gold Rush LP while the others were making their debuts. David Crosby and Graham Nash took a little more time, releasing theirs in 1971, but Stephen Stills put out his first LP in November 1970. It's a remarkably strong record, arguably one Stills himself never fully surpassed, though at times he came surprisingly close to matching the level of this debut. Beyond the wealth of sublime songs, the album also features an impressive roster of guest musicians from the creme de la creme of the pop world. Crosby and Nash provide backing vocals, ex-Beatle Ringo Starr appears on drums, and perhaps most remarkably, this is the only record to feature both Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton, though not on the same track. The album opens with Love the One You're With, which became the big hit single and kicks things off with real strength. What follows is a collection of songs that prove Stills could stand firmly on his own, even without the full Deja Vu lineup behind him. At number 4, we find a rather obscure album, The Garden of Jane Delaunay by the British folk band Trees, a beautiful folky debut with occasional hints of lush psychedelia. Although only 4 traditional folk songs appear on the record, the original compositions sound as though they could have been passed down from ancient times. Trees treat us to a unique sound that feels both authentically old and yet strikingly contemporary. A remarkable achievement. The title track was later beautifully covered by Françoise Hardy, while the well-known She Moved Thro' the Fair also receives a masterful interpretation from Trees. Extra points go to the stunning sleeve painted by the band's guitarist David Costa. Collectors and music fanatics have long revered Trees, and the only 2 albums they released during their brief existence. But if you're not yet familiar with the band or this record, it's definitely worth discovering. You'll find the Spotify link in the description of this video. We're entering the top 3 with none other than Bill Withers. Harlem, Ain't No Sunshine, Grandma's Hands, they're all on his debut album, which also happens to be the only LP on this list from 1971. Just As I Am immediately showcases what Withers did best: warm, heartfelt soul with devastatingly emotional lyrics, delivered in his velvety voice. The album also includes a couple of covers, Everybody's Talkin' and The Beatles' Let It Be. Neither surpasses the originals, but they do reflect the wide range of influences that shaped Withers' music. Alongside the soul, we hear funk and a more acoustic side, all of which underline the fact that Withers was, above all, an outstanding songwriter in his own right. A timeless record. In second place, we find the Dutch prog rock formation Earth and Fire with their self-titled 1970 debut. Packaged in a beautiful gatefold sleeve reminiscent of a matchbox, the album later received a striking psychedelic cover design for the UK editions by none other than Roger Dean, famous for his many iconic artworks for acts like Osibisa, Uriah Heep, and the British band Yes. The hit Single Seasons remains an absolute classic. But beyond that, the record is pure killer, no filler. There isn't a weak moment to be found on this debut. Tracks like Ruby Is the One and You Know the Way are just a few of the many highlights. Although Earth and Fire were a Dutch band, the album was released internationally and gained traction in multiple countries. And no wonder. They sounded like a group with global ambitions, fully capable of competing with the best international acts of their time. And finally, the number 1 spot in this 10 Essentials list. We already heard him mentioned back at number 9.
Number 9.
But first place truly belongs to none other than John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band. Not to be confused with Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band. And I say that from experience, because I once accidentally bought that album thinking I had Lennon's debut, only to be sorely disappointed. The cover art and the title may look almost identical, but the music, or whatever Yoko passes off as music, most definitely is not. I couldn't exchange that record fast enough for Lennon's LP. Before this release, Lennon and Ono had already put out 3 sound collage records, but those were really only bought by the most hardcore Lennon collectors. I can't imagine the average Beatles fan sitting through them for fun. That's why Plastic Ono Band is generally seen as the true start of Lennon's solo career. It's striking that this channel hasn't dedicated a single full video to the Fab Four yet. And still, they're the band most frequently referenced whenever we talk about other artists. Of course, the Beatles' debut album appeared in the previous 10 Essentials episode, but at this point you could almost turn it into a drinking game. Take a shot every time I mention the Beatles. Now, onto the album itself. Packed with classics, Plastic Ono Band finds Lennon singing out his deepest emotions, sometimes literally screaming them out, as in the primal scream style of the opener, Mother. That raw emotion only heightens the impact of the songs. This record is more than just an album. It's a creative, an emotional statement from a man breaking free from the constraints of the Beatles. In God, Lennon famously declares he doesn't believe in the Fab Four anymore. He only believes in himself and Yoko. And between those two bookends, we get gems like Hold On, Working Class Hero, Isolation, and The Beautiful Love. Here, Lennon proves that after all those years, he could absolutely hold his own without his former songwriting partner, Paul McCartney. His solo discography may be small, tragically cut short by his untimely death, but it certainly got off to a flying start here. Alongside Imagine, Plastic Ono Band stands as the very best Lennon ever gave us as a solo artist. And that wraps up the second episode of 10 Essentials, the first part of the 1970s debut albums. If you were to put this list together, what would it look like? Leave your thoughts down in the comments because I'm always curious to hear your take. Next time, we'll jump forward another 10 years and dive into the early 80s. You can listen back to all the music from this episode and from all the other videos in the Spotify playlist. And don't forget to check out the social media pages on Facebook and Instagram because I will follow you if you follow me. All the links are in the description below. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss an episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. And in the meantime, drop the needle, press play, and remember, we're only in it for the music.